In this fast-paced, hectic community of Miami, it is somewhat easy to reduce the meaning of life into the moment. We can get so into the rat race, become so driven by externals, that even the commute home from the office becomes a battleground in which we plan to take no prisoners. We can go through an entire day without the first thought about God or about the things in life that, after all, really do matter. Sometimes we need a gentle reminder of not only who we are, but whose we are. It is amazing to me how many people who came into contact with Christ the King Lutheran Church through the years still carry a small aluminum cross in their pocket or change purse, which reminds them not only of my Father, but more importantly, of their Father as well.
Some of you know the story of Johnny Ring. He was a drummer boy in the Union Army, and the soldiers in his infantry admired their captain so much that they pitched in and gave him a very costly sword. On one occasion, they were encamped on the south side of a river when word came that the enemy was pressing hard and that they were to retreat to the northern side of the stream. This they did, and then they burned the wooden covered bridge that had connected the one shore with the other. But in their haste to break camp, they had forgotten this sword that the men had given to their captain. Johnny Ring was the first to realize this, and so he ran across the flaming bridge, retrieved the sword, ran back, and fell a charred little mass at the captain's feet. They took him to the field hospital, and there Johnny Ring died. And just before he died, that captain said, "As God is my witness, from this moment on, I will live two lives, Johnny Ring's and mine." Now that captain's name was Russell Conwell, and he wrote Acres of Diamonds and delivered that address all over this country. He made over $2 million and used every bit of it to send young people to college. Doctors, ministers, teachers, nurses, lawyers, engineers, musicians, almost every profession is indebted to this man who lived under the sense that he had been died for. And in his study on North Broad Street in Philadelphia, he kept that sword as a daily reminder that someone had died for him. We keep a cross on the steeples of our churches, on the lawn, over the altar, to remind us too that we have been died for. This is my body broken for you. This is my blood shed for you. He died for me. And to remind me of that, just as Russell Conwell kept that sword in his office, so I carry a cross in my pocket. To remind me not only of the event, but of my response to this man who died for me. Let me tell you how I first got this cross. One like it. I actually, sometimes you lose them and then you have to replace them. But at any rate, about 17 years ago, I was asked to speak at a youth rally at the Methodist Church in Hialeah. And when I finished speaking, the youth sponsors, he happened to be an airline pilot, came up and he gave me this cross. And I've carried it ever since, and many of you have carried it ever since. I noticed a few people came in this morning and said, I still have mine. I know that at one time 2 of our members happened to be in the same hospital room at Baptist Hospital, and they didn't know that they had went to the same church. But when they emptied their pockets and put their crosses out, the one looked across and saw a cross. And he said, I go to Christ the King. He said, well, so do I, you see. And so many people have carried these. And I'm kind of grateful for what it does for me, because you see, it's there in my pocket every time, all day long, that I reach for change. There is the cross. It's there the first thing in the morning when I take the change and put it in my pocket to make way for a new day. It's there the last thing at night when I empty my pockets and put the change on the dresser. It reminds me of something that I really do not want to forget, that he died for me, that I belong to him, and that therefore I must deny myself, take up his cross, and follow him. Now notice I don't wear it on my lapel or anything. I'm not trying to convince anybody else that I'm a Christian. It's in my pocket. All I'm trying to do is convince me, because I'm the problem. Now, if you'll look at the cross that they gave you, you'll see stamped on the front is Jesus Christ is Lord. That is the earliest confession of the Christian church. That's all you had to say in order to be baptized in the early Christian church. Jesus Christ is Lord. And then under that you'll see a circle, and in that is the number 12. Now, a circle is the figure or symbol of completeness. You are a complete man or a complete woman in Jesus Christ. You are a whole person when you are with Jesus Christ. And the 12, of course, is for the 12 disciples. And when you carry this cross in your pocket, you have to remember that you too are one of his disciples. You know, in the movie Barabbas, we're told that Barabbas got into considerable difficulty after he was released. You know, the crowd shouted, "Give us Barabbas," and they crucified Jesus instead of Barabbas. Well, he was finally sold into slavery, and around his neck he wore a chain with a metal medallion on which was the face of Tiberius Caesar, the emperor. In other words, to show that Barabbas belonged to Caesar. But the Christian slaves would turn the medallion over and would cut a cross on the back to show that they really belonged to Jesus Christ. Now, Barabbas also had a cross cut on the back of his medallion, but when it was seen by the proconsul and meant punishment, he scratched it off. And that too often is your story and mine. I've told you before about going up to the Knights of Columbus in West Palm Beach some time ago. In fact, I was the first Protestant clergyman to address the Roman Catholics at the monastery and also at Palm Beach. And I left a little late, and I was speeding up the turnpike, and of course, sure enough, the cop came and pulled me over. And as I got out of the car, as I always do, he got out of the car, and he had sort of a red face and a little pudgy and red hair. And I said, of course, I was dressed in my clericals, you know, and I said, I bet he's a Roman Catholic, and I'll get out of this. So I said to him, I said, "I'm terribly sorry, officer." I said, "I know I was going fast, but I'm late, and I have to speak at the Knights of Columbus, see?" And he looked at me and said, "I don't give a damn about that. I'm a Lutheran myself." It doesn't always work that way. I guess I can't wear that black suit. I hate it. So I went this time when the license had to be renewed and wore the black suit and had my picture taken, with that black outfit on. So now when they see it, they know immediately that I'm something or other. And but it doesn't always work. I was going through Spartanburg and was picked up this summer. And he looked at the picture and he said, what are you? And I said, "I'm a Lutheran." He said, "Oh," he said, "I'm a Lutheran too." And he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, down to see my son. He just enrolled in the seminary." And he said, "Oh," he said, and he knew where it was and what have you. He belonged to the church in Spartanburg, but he nonetheless gave me a ticket. He said, 81 is too fast, is what he said. But we change sometimes, don't we? When it's kind of more convenient and easier and less costly, we have a way of being able to hide the cross in our life, hide our commitment, because it's the Barabbas in us. forget that someone died for us and that we have a responsibility as fellow workers with Christ. Now, in this gospel, which is not really the gospel for today, it talks about the miracle at the wedding of Cana. And we're told that it was Jesus' first miracle. It took place, no doubt, shortly after he had called the 12 disciples. Perhaps this was their first official function as a group, to attend a wedding, to witness a miracle, to taste water turned to wine. And they must have thought, what a jolly tour of duty this is going to be, you know. After all, who isn't fascinated by weddings and wine and miracles? But the disciples soon found out that there was a lot more to it than that. While there is happiness, and while there is excitement, and while there is a surprise in the Christian life, that's not the whole of it. There's also a matter of everyday duty and responsibility, which also has its special kind of reward. That's why I mentioned the parenthesis when I read the lesson, you see, which you normally wouldn't do. But this is the parenthesis. Let me read it again. It goes like this. When the ruler of the feast had tasted the wine, the water that was made wine, and knew not whence it was. Now come the parenthesis. But the servants who drew the water, they knew. Then the end of the parenthesis, and then it goes on to say something about saving the wine, best wine to last. But note that a miracle had taken place here, and hardly anyone knew about it. The governor of the feast didn't know. The bridegroom didn't know. The guests didn't know. They came for fun and fellowship and wine. They got what they came for. But the only people who knew of the miracle, the only people who knew of the presence of a unique guest, the only people who had a hint that the Messiah himself was there, were the workers, the people who were there attending to their daily duty. I think maybe it was a kind of an announcement on the part of Jesus right at the very beginning of his ministry that you get out of all of this what you put into it. You can come to church for entertainment or for water turned to coffee or for peace of mind or fellowship, and none of that's wrong. It's fine. But all I'm saying is that if you really get into it, if you are really committed, if you really know what this is all about and that Jesus Christ is somebody that you've taken into your heart, then you know the presence, you see, of a guest that many people who come to church on Sunday morning and walk out never even suspect, never meet, never know. And you know, it's the common tasks, the ordinary jobs, the routine details, the duty that has tremendous potential for revealing to us the presence of God in human life. Now, I carry the cross in my pocket to remind me every day that I have a commitment to Christ. In everything that I do, everything I say, everything that I am, a commitment of my time, a commitment of my talent, and a commitment of treasure. Every Christian has an equal commitment to Christ. You belong to Christ. And you have to ask in any situation, not what you would do, but as a follower of Christ, what would Jesus have you do in this particular circumstance? And so I need something like a cross in my pocket that will remind me day after day, you see, all day long, of this vow that I have really made to seek first the kingdom of God. You know the story of the young Presbyterian minister in the Church of Scotland who arrived at this new parish and decided he would make calls on his people. And he walked up to one house that was just lovely. It was perfectly groomed. The grass was just right. The hedges were trimmed properly. There were flowers in the front. And it had a nice coat of paint on the front door. The rest was brick, or rather stone. And he just walked up the path and he said, I wonder if Jesus Christ lives here. And so he knocked on the door, and the lady of the house opened the door, and of course he was standing there in his clerical collar, and she knew who he was, and he said, pardon me, but does Jesus Christ live here? And she just didn't know what to do, and so she just ran from the door to the back where her husband was out in the garden potting some plants, and she said, do you know who's here? It's the new vicar from the church. And he asked the strangest thing. He asked, does Jesus Christ live here? And he said, well, didn't you tell him that we do belong to the church? Didn't you tell him that we support the church? Didn't you tell him that we go as often as we can? And she said, no, I didn't tell him that, because he didn't really ask that. He asked, does Jesus Christ live here? And that's a very different thing. You know what impresses me? The fact that Jesus Christ does live in the hearts of so many members of this church. You know, I'm flabbergasted. You come here week after week, and you become involved, and you give of your time, and you're so generous, and I never have to really appeal for money. I try to do it just once a year. And yet you're so generous. You know, there have been times when we've needed money, when we built this building, for instance, and I was concerned at that time about the high interest rates, and so we prayed to God and trusted Him, and He always has a way, doesn't He, of meeting needs like that through wonderful people like you. Next week we're going to start another little addition now at the back, and I'm sure that we'll do the same thing. We'll pray about it and leave it in your hands, and the whole thing will be taken care of. But I just want you to know how grateful I am, and I just want to thank you again for what you are. You know, they say this is kind of a me generation. Everything is concerned with me, and that is true in some cases. Certainly, you pick up the papers, and every day there seems to be some kind of a new revelation about someone's selfishness and a violation of a public trust and stealing somebody else's money. And we talk a whole lot about a person's rights, and we speak so little about a person's duty, what we owe. If I claim the right to walk up the streets unmolested, I think I have a duty to support the police department. Yeah. If my child claims the right to go to public schools, I think that he ought not wreck the place when he gets there. If I want my rights as a free citizen, I have a duty to go to the polls and to vote. In other words, there are no rights without duties. Now, by the same token, if you want the right to belong or to own whatever this tremendous piece of property, and a church like this, and if you want to have adequate facilities for the meetings and for the Sunday school, then I guess as a member you have a duty to support it. And that's what you've done. I know that there are people, let's say in the church, who make $50,000 a year, who give something like $500 a year to the church. There are other people in the church who make $5,000 a year and give $50 a year to the church. And you see, neither gift is really adequate, because it represents only 1% of income. And you know what Shula said? Shula said that there's only one way to build and maintain a church, and that's for the members to tithe. And it's true. 10% right off the top, no excuses. But then you have the people, and you have the interest, and you have no problems, and you have the program. I'm looking forward, for instance, to having more staff here, to having people engaged primarily in teaching adults. I'm interested in having the people interested in the youth or in the Christian education. Do you know what? Do you know how many people Shula has on the payroll that work for him directly? 350 on the payroll. He also has 700 volunteers in addition to that. 350 on the payroll. I think this church can be the greatest church in South Florida if we just capture the vision. It's a matter of commitment, isn't it? A lot of people who, and this does pain me, who come forward and take new members into the church, and we ask, you know, will you be diligent in the use of the means of grace? That means, will you take communion? And will you come to church on Sunday morning? Will you talk favorably? That's one of the things we ask, you know, about the church. Someone said the other night that they were at a pastor's fast and they were talking about what's wrong with the church. That's a terrible topic for conversation, my friends. There's nothing wrong with the church. Let's talk about what's right with the church. How do you suppose we got this place here? How do you suppose we got it all paid for if there's something wrong with the church? There's nothing wrong with the church. That's not a good topic for conversation. At another place, they sat around and they said, hey, let's talk about why we became members of the church and what it means to us. That's the kind of conversation we need at the Peasants Bears groups, you see. A positive approach, always a positive approach. There are people who come into church and they make these commitments and they don't keep them. And what happens, you see, is the wine then in their life turns to water. And all I'm doing today really is letting everybody have a cross. Some of you have them, but once again, it's been 6 or 7 years since I did this here. I've done it all throughout the whole state of Florida and with WizNet up in Atlantic City and in Philadelphia and all over the place. But just to recall some of these duties and obligations, and perhaps it can be kind of a new beginning for you of a real, vital, vibrant faith. God loves you. So do I. And the cross in my pocket recalls to me what my God through Christ has done. You know, let me tell you something. When I first got this cross, I was in the Royal Castle, which used to be a restaurant chain. Those of you who moved here recently, and they served hamburgers and birch beer primarily. And there was one down on the corner of Ponce and Giralda. And I was in there with my 3 children, and they were much younger. See my 2 girls sitting over there today. But my youngest, who is now 21, was 4 years of age. And a man came in. I don't know if they even remember this, but it's true. And they came in. A man came in in a wheelchair, and he was sort of spastic, and he moved with rather jerky, painful motions. And he ordered a hamburger and a birch beer. And they put the birch beer, I remember, on the seat. You know, the sort of the counter. It was a counter situation. But that has a tendency to twist a little bit. And we were all finished. We were just about ready to go. And I noticed that he had some kind of difficulty bending down, getting the straw in his mouth. Well, that was his problem. So I went to pay my bill, and I pulled out my change. And, of course, there was the cross in my pocket. And I don't know. So I paid for him, and I went over and I held the stool so that he could get the drink. And then when it was over, I wheeled him across the street to the other side where he was selling magazines, and I bought the magazine. Well, as I came back, my 3 children now were lined up on the corner, and my younger said, "Gee, Dad, you sure are a nice guy." And I thought, sure, I certainly was. But I was going to sprout wings any minute, you see. But then I put my hand in my pocket to get the keys for the car, and there was the cross again, see, and I knew the truth, that I really wasn't a nice guy, but that Christ can make a nice guy out of me when I let him. And so I really carry the cross to remind me to let him. The Bible says, to as many as receive him, he receives the power to become the sons of God. This is our hope. We owe God all we have. We come from God, we're going to God. While we're here, we have to wash our brother's feet. We're servants. And while we serve, the water is turned to wine. We know the presence of an unseen guest. And he calls us then not to be servants, but to be sons and daughters. And then this whole business of duty is translated into love. And so the cross in my pocket, like the sword kept by Russell Codwell, reminds me of things that I simply cannot afford to forget. That I have been died for, that I have made a commitment, and that all that I have is God's. Just this, and I'm done. There's this magnificent cross over the altar. Well, this wasn't done, by an artist, that is someone who does this for a living. This was made by John Oberg, who happens to be a pilot for National Airlines. He's a co-pilot. And he was on strike. And he decided that he would play with these cut nails, and he made sort of a little map of Florida.
And when I saw it, I said, John, why don't you make a cross? That would be very appropriate for Lent in the old church. So he made the cross, and it's still in there. And we were very happy with it. We used to use it only during Lent because it's made out of nails, concrete nails. So when now we decided that we were going ahead with this magnificent building, and I was thinking about what I wanted here, I thought, what I want is that same thing. I want that kind of a cross here in the church. So I went to John and said, John, could you do that? And he said, I don't know. He said, making a little cross is one thing. He says, but making a cross that has to be as big as that has to be, and square. He said, you know how much time is involved in that? He says, but that isn't the big thing. He says, I just have never done anything like that before. But he started. And from time to time, it was necessary for me to go over and say, look, John, don't quit, will you? It's going to be magnificent, it really is. And when we got it up, you couldn't see it because it was all black nails with the little pieces of the gold in there. And then he took it down and put those pieces of brass in it, which made it, that was sort of an afterthought, but it made it so magnificent. But all I'm saying is that he never did anything like that before, and look how great it turned out. And maybe you can make the same kind of commitment. Maybe you can make this kind of commitment for me personally, that you won't miss one single Sunday during Advent. Okay? Be here Christmas Eve. That you will support this program with your prayers. You always do support it with your money. And with that kind of commitment, maybe there can be an advent or a coming or a newness about what you really believe. You can be enthusiastic because you will be in God. And you can be just as pleased with the results in your life as John Oberg and everybody else has been with this thing that he never did before. See, just carry the cross in your pocket, and as long as you do, Christ the King will remain here, and Christ will remain your King. Amen. And now may the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds.